start this next video. Okay, so now we'll go to the mushroom field, which manages the collection of mushroom, allows queries and spawning of new mushrooms. We'll just get into that. So I've got this grid controller here. On initialization, I have a mush count in player area int, which is used in the flea, used for the flea calculation, whether it can spawn or not. Then I establish two vectors, mush spawn 1 and mush spawn 2, and then I iterate over the grid and create a random number. If I set this to check once the mushroom is inside the player area, and then I set the mush spawn to the index and the random column. So this represents the row, and I just spawn a mushroom. Only one mushroom per row inside the player area, and then else once I'm outside the player area, I spawn 2 mushrooms per row, which is why I have the 2 vectors, and then I just spawn the mushroom. This is my collect damaged shrooms function, which when it starts, it clears in case there's leftover mushrooms in the stack. It traverses the grid for the damaged shrooms only once, and if the state is poisoned, then I add it to the grid, and else if the state is normal, I check the health to make sure that it's less than the total health, and then add it to the stack. This is my clear grid function, which I don't have switching scenes implemented. I'm only in the one scene, so this is used to clear the grid and then repopulate the grid. This regenerate mushrooms function just goes through the list of the stack of damaged shrooms and calls regen on them, and then once it's empty, I call grid regen over, which is a function that inside the game controller, managers, game controller, once the regen is over, I do this check, which basically checks that if the current mode is attractor mode, I spawn the player and activate the wave, and this spawn player function basically just checks checks the current player number and then spawns the correct spawns the spawns the player and attaches the correct input strategy to that player. If in the case of the AI, I'm using FSM, so I set the start state of the AI, and I create a player ship using these player pointers. But I gotta get back to the mushroom grid, stay on track here. Participates in the end of level mushroom generation, which it did, and likely interacts with the text high score manager to allow text to block some game critters. So how I do that, how I block, is I have a block letters class which inherits from the mushroom class and just overrides some of the functions. So like the initialize function the delete, just because when these blocks are updated into the mushroom grid, so I need to make sure that um, they're not updating other uh, in-game statistics. Uh, the get health just returns total health always, so their health never goes down. It has its own state, because when the scorpion was hitting them, it was trying to convert them to poison, and I would get a vector subscript out of range error, which luckily I was able to fix, but seemed to just run into more problems. Uh, Allows queries. Oh, I gotta go over. Uh, where was I? Mushroom grid controller. Um, so this is the spawn block letter function, which spawns a new block letter. I don't have a factory for this, unfortunately. I ran out of time, which initializes the block and pushes the block to the mushrooms on field stack, and adds it to the grid, which is this array here. This first one, this mushroom grid array. Therefore, I can place it and interact with it on the grid, and in this way, once it's inside this array, which basically represents the entire mushroom grid, the centipedes will run into it and treat it as if it were a mushroom. And this spawn mushroom, this is what I use when I spawn in the initialization. I convert the position to a window position, and then this check here is to make sure that mushrooms don't spawn on top of each other. If there's already a mushroom there, it just returns without getting to this next part, which creates the mushroom using the mushroom factory, pushes the mushroom to the stack of the mushrooms on field, and adds it to the grid. And then this set mush int grid data is just to